everybody, this is Alethea Thomas. Thank you so much for joining my channel today. And today we're going to talk about War and Peace. This book has basically started consuming my life lately and I couldn't be happier. So I began reading this about 2 days ago. I think I started actually on the 13th to kind of just start reading it, start listening to it also on through Audible. And I have been just absorbed in it, and I didn't know if I would like it or not, but so far I'm really enjoying this. This is the type of book I think I have always wanted to read, and I just didn't know it. I have always been very interested in the upper class aristocracy. I have also been very interested in the Napoleonic Wars for a long time, and I didn't really know of any books that kind of covered the Napoleonic era and the wars that was going on. And I don't think I actually knew that War and Peace covered that material, or at least that time period, until fairly recently. I want to say within the last few years. So when I heard that it covered that time period, but it was from the perspective of Russia, because it is Tolstoy, telling the story, he being Russian, I thought that, hey, that would be really interesting, because I don't really know that much about it, and I've been really interested in learning about the Napoleonic era. I watched a documentary, I think that was on PBS, Napoleon's campaign through Europe, and that was actually very informative. I'd watched that several years ago, and I enjoyed that a lot. So I had a little bit of knowledge, but not a lot, just what I picked up from that television show. So to kind of prepare for this book, I also listened to another book. It was called A Short History of Russia. So it covered Russia from the very beginnings of Russia in medieval Russia, and then up to the current state of affairs. So it is a very broad, swath of history of Russia, and it's really good. So I do recommend you also, if you don't know anything about Russia, you might go ahead and listen to something like that, just kind of a brief history. Very interesting stuff, very different from other European countries, their kind of beginnings and how they developed over time. Russia has a very interesting history because it has always been the aristocracy, the people who had the money, the people who owned the land, and then everybody else. And everybody else was either a serf, and in some cases very, very few were merchants, like a really small majority. And then there were the people that had all of the money, all of the power, everything. And that really hasn't changed that much throughout the entire history. Serfdom actually didn't really end in Russia until right before the Russian Revolution and the end of the Tsars. At that point, kind of what happened was that the people who still had the money, still had the power, it just sort of changed hands a little bit, and then communism pretty much became, aristocracy, autocracy on steroids in Russia. And it's kind of still like that to this day. Really nobody owns the land. The government owns the majority of the land, and a lot of the government actually runs the businesses there. So it's a very different way of running things. It's just a very different culture. There's always been this strange balance. Russians are Russian. We are Russian people, but they've had a great appreciation for the West and for the European West. and especially France, because for a very long time during the period of the czars, they wanted to speak French in their courts as the official language because they thought it was more, pleasing. It was a high aestheticism. It was more refined. It was grander. It was just like the best thing. So they felt that the way that the French court operated was the best way you could do it, and so they brought a lot of that into their system of government. Catherine the Great was notorious for wanting to bring Western European ideas into Russia, but she was also an authoritarian, and she also believed that the divine right to rule by kings and queens and that sort of thinking. So she wanted to be more open to European ideas, but at the same time she did not want a revolution. She did not want to lose her power. She wanted the aristocracy to have all of the power. So it was just how that was. And that thinking is very pervasive in Russia. There's, like I said, there was kind of a lot of back and forth. Are we Russian or are we European? And that is a question that Russians ask themselves to this day. Do we want to be more European or do we want to be Russian? So, and figuring out what being Russian is has kind of been this question. What is it to truly be Russian? I think that Tolstoy approaches some of that in here as well. But we'll talk about the book some more specifically in just a second. So another resource that I have ordered and that I will be getting pretty soon is called Russia Against Napoleon. And it is another, I think it's a Penguin edition of that, and it is the true story of the Napoleonic campaigns in Russia, and the battles, things that occurred during the battles, and how the Russians fought Napoleon back. And I really wanted that so that as I read through here and I read about the battles, then I could go and either read the stuff about the battles in the true accounts first before I get to the battles, or maybe together, or as I'll figure out how exactly I want to do it. But I wanted that account as well. And I think it's a pretty bulky book too. It's like 600 pages, where this is over 1,000 pages. And this project is probably going to keep me busy for a while. As I said, I'm also listening to it on my Audible subscription. So this is the Oxford World's Classic Edition. And what Oxford has done is they took the Maud translation of this text. So Louise and Aylmer Maud were the translators, and they were actually the translators that Tolstoy himself was like, here, you guys translate this. He hired them to translate at least another book for sure, but he approved of their translation of his books. So they're kind of considered like the translation to read. There is a lot of French in the Maud translation, which I kind of appreciate. I do know some French, so when I read the French text, I am actually able to parse through most of it, no problem. If it gets very complicated, I can just look in. I look at the translation. It's right on the same page. I just have to, briefly look down and look back up. If that bothers people, then I do not suggest this Maud translation. I would suggest another translation, and there are 2 or 3 different translations out there, and most of those other translations are strictly just if you're reading an English text in English, so everything would be in English. The reason that there is French in here is that Tolstoy wrote the text in Russian and in French. So like a Russian edition would have the text in Russian and in French. This English edition has everything in English that was spoken in Russian, and then the French in French. So what Oxford has done here is that they took that Maud translation and then they revised it. So Amy Mandelker was the editor and reviser of the text, and I think that she did an excellent job here. There is a lot of notes at the back that, just kind of some little notations that you can read through. So she goes through like notes on the different chapters, different portions of the chapters. Just usually it's just historical context that she's giving you with those, where something happened, when something happened, who they're referring to, like prisoners in Africa or the Tsar or Caesar's commentaries. There's just kind of just general context that a reader today may not be as aware of as like a reader 200 or 300 years ago reading this. Or I'm sorry, a few hundred years ago reading this. So, that being said, what do I think so far? I think the Maud translation is very good. I am loving this. I have gotten to the second, let's see here. I am still in book 1. I am in part 2. And very quickly on my way to part 3. I am currently at page 153. Part 3 starts on page 214, so I'm getting there. So far, we are just now getting to the first actual battle, I believe, that will be fought, and it's by the Danube. And most of the beginning of the book is establishing a few of the main characters. Our 3 main characters are Pierre, Natasha, and Andre. And, just it kind of established who they are, who their family members are, what position they are currently in. All 3 of them are quite young. I think Andre is the oldest, Pierre would be the second oldest, and then Natasha being the youngest. Natasha is, I think, at the very beginning of the book, about 13 or so. Pierre has just come back from studying in Europe, and he has come back with all of these European ideals. He sort of idolizes Napoleon. And then there's Andre. Andre has just gotten married, and he is, his wife is pregnant. They refer to his wife as the little princess, and she's like this cute little, darling girl who's maybe not the most attractive woman in the world, but she has her qualities that make her just kind of darling to everybody. And I think that my favorite character so far is probably the little princess, because if I were to be living in a time like that, I would imagine myself to being in her role, just kind of off to the side, quietly, doing her sewing and, her embroidery work and waiting for her to have her children and, basically doing as she is told, because I can imagine myself in that exact same position. It's kind of a dream of mine to just kind of exist in a beautiful surroundings in the aristocratic world and just be there. It would just be lovely. Maybe that's a really shallow and silly dream, but it's something I've always wanted, just to be around elegance all the time. That's just my dream. So the first part of the book is all about that is their current existence. This is the peace part. This is establishing our characters and their surroundings and where they've come from, and they've all come from the upper class. Pierre is the exception, as Pierre was not considered a legitimate son, but he was the only son of was he a baron or duke? Count, I think. So he was the only legitimate son of his father. The rest were all women and princesses. And so he has become legitimized at the death of his father. And so he would be inheriting then his father's place. So he's new into this aristocracy. But he was educated in Europe. So he is kind of that upper level still, even though he wasn't really recognized and legitimized. So So that's the beginning, and I imagine as we get closer to the actual battles and things start happening and the gears of war start to turn and perhaps people die, we start losing folks, that things will get really interesting really fast. Opinions will change. The idolization of Napoleon will probably end. Who knows? I don't know. But it'll be very interesting. So this is a extremely interesting and fascinating lesson, I believe, in history. And I hope to understand Tolstoy's, what he's trying to tell us as I'm reading this. I'm pretty sure that his main message is that war is dumb, war is useless, war is stupid, the philosophy behind it, just railing against war, like an anti-war message, is pretty much what I feel is going to be the case here. I read some Goodreads reviews, just ones that I know didn't have any spoilers because I don't want to spoil anything. I want to be surprised, and I want to feel the feelings, especially if we lose characters down the road, because I know that happens. I'm sure that happens. Not that I actually know, but I feel in my gut that this was going to happen. This book will probably make me cry, which, I'm okay with. I don't like to cry, but if it's done the right way, I don't mind it so much. So I mean, we're just really getting started, and it's just so beautiful so far. I like Tolstoy's writing. Now, I don't know if that's just a credit to how it was translated by Maud and also by Oxford's translator, but I like the writing a lot. It's very clear. It's very concise. We're not too flowery. Now, when he is describing the settings, yes, things get picturesque and beautiful, and the descriptions are really wonderful to read, and so I appreciate that a lot. But the conversations are very natural, very flowing. They seem like conversations that real people would actually have. I mean, even to me, and these people were alive, supposedly, in Tolstoy's times when they were alive, their conversation's very natural. So that's really nice. I really enjoyed listening to the conversations of these aristocratic people in their drawing rooms, because it's just a joy to be there right now. So I'm hoping because now I'm at the part where that we are at the Danube, and we're going to start the actual war part of War and Peace. I'm hoping that we will go back to the drawing rooms very soon, because I don't want to completely be on the battlefield now. I imagine that multiple chapters in a row will be on the battlefield, and things may get horrific really quickly. And if that's the case, that's okay, because reading has been very smooth so far. I'm hoping that Tolstoy has brought in his ability to tell the story into those war passages as well. So hopefully that will be just as smooth as reading, the stuff where we're in the piece, But if it does get a little tough, I do have the audiobook, and I can just kind of breeze through the war parts if they kind of get to me, and I don't want to actually physically, visually read them myself. So that's kind of my check-in with War and Peace right now. I am going to try and vlog as I go through this. So I'll probably be doing about 7 or 8 vlogs, just to kind of split this up and make it pretty even. I've also heard that the epilogue is not really necessary to read. And it looks rather short compared to the rest of the book, because the epilogue starts on 1213 and it ends on 1270. So it's not super long. But I've heard that the epilogue really isn't that necessary. But I think I'll read it anyway. Apparently, the epilogue is Tolstoy just riffing on his thoughts on war itself and how wrong it is, and philosophy and all that. But I may be really into it by the time we get to that point. So we'll see. And if the epilogue just kind of goes off the rails for me and I'm not enjoying it, then maybe I'll just quit there and then call it good. So we'll see how it goes. But anyway, I thank you all so very much for watching this. I hope you enjoyed it. And I look forward to doing more of this. I have my cozy new chair, and I couldn't be happier. There's an ottoman that is at the foot here, and so I'm gonna throw in some film of myself kind of reading this at the beginning, so you might actually be able to see some of that, like my whole setup. I have a table next to me, like down here. You can't really see it, but I can put my my drinks there, any other books I want to read, my glasses, because I cannot see that well, especially when the print is this freaking tiny sometimes. And I just have a nice cozy setup to read this, so I think that this is making it even more enjoyable to just relax and be cozy and just enjoy the ride. So anyway, I hope that you have books that you are liking as well and are enjoying those. I should get to a few other short ones pretty soon. I had put down Sylvia Plath's Bell Jar when I started reading this, and I need to get back to it because I'm like halfway through the Bell Jar almost. And if I hurry and finish that quickly, I can get back to this again. But there are still other books as well I'd like to get to. But as long as War and Peace has me hooked, I think I'm hardcore going to stick with War and Peace. I have a feeling I'm going to get through this way faster than I did the Count of Monte Cristo, because it's so fascinating, it's so interesting, and it's on a subject that I was really interested in learning more about anyway. So thank you all so much, and I hope you have a great day. Bye-bye.